But when we talk about faith, we're talking about trusting in what God has said. Not trusting that you can create something God has said. That future is laid out in Scripture. So when we talk about faith, we're talking about trusting in what God has said.
Faith to just be simple belief or trust. I think that's lexically the only plausible definition of the word. And I think that's the way the word is defined in Hebrews 11:1 anyway. And then I don't have to rely on this, but the whole phrase is soteriological, which is to say what we have to do to go to heaven, to kind of speak popularly. So the facts were the necessary fact. What are the necessary facts to be believed? And then you have Romans debate, and you have the 1 Corinthians 15, and you have the Gospel of John, and that's where the argument kind of started and has been growing for, again, a couple of decades now.
Yes, and much jockeying for position about whose favorite passage is going to hold sway. And
so to your point, then the question becomes, if we accept the idea that, so if we and everybody ends up somewhere, I don't know where this part happens, somewhere along the line, everybody accepts the idea that what faith is persuasion that some proposition is true. Well, then the question naturally becomes, then what propositions do I have to believe
the proposition,
so that I can say that and then the standard GES answer has become, you believe that Jesus gives everlasting life to everyone who believes in him for it. That's kind of way that they have come to formulate it. If you believe that Jesus gives everlasting life to everyone who believes in him for it, then you believe the gospel, and necessarily you have everlasting life. And I will refer viewers back to the conversation you and I had on whether or not assurance is the essence of saving faith.
Yeah.
Conversation. I argued that I don't think that faith being viewed as a proposition is even the right idea. I don't think that I think the notion of the content of saving faith is a misnomer from the get-go. And I think it's a misnomer because, Tim, I don't think that faith is belief in a proposition. I just think that's the wrong way to view faith. The nature of faith is not being persuaded that a proposition is true. And so what I tried to do is I gave several examples in the Bible where the word faith is used and it cannot be translated persuasion. It just can't reasonably. So my favorite example is John 2:2, where it says that many believed in Jesus, but he would not. And then the text is something like believe in those people, because he knew. Well, if you take the idea of persuaded, well, many were persuaded in him or by him. The first part makes sense, but he was not persuaded by them because he knew it was in their heart. That just, to me, was one of many places that it just doesn't make sense. Paul talks about having the gospel entrusted to him. That word entrusted him is the same word. It's pisteuo, right? It's pistis. And so what does it mean that is the same word? It's pisteuo, right? It's pistis. And so what does it mean that is the same word? It's pisteuo, right? It's pistis. And so what does it mean that the gospel was persuaded unto him? It just doesn't make sense. And so my argument then was that fundamentally, at least within the semantic domain of the word, is that faith, it can't only mean mere persuasion. It also has within its, maybe it does sometimes, and I'd like, actually, you tell me if you think it ever does. It maybe means mere persuasion sometimes. I think Romans 4 it might. But then other times it means something like to entrust yourself to or entrust something to. And when you're entrusting someone or something, that's not believing a set of propositions. So before I go any further, that's not believing a set of propositions. So before I go any further, that's not believing a set of propositions. So before I go any further, it means something like to entrust yourself to or entrust something to. And when you're entrusting someone or something, that's not believing a set of propositions. So before I go any further, that was where this started for me, the conversation we're having now, a couple weeks back. So your thoughts on that so far? Where I decided to really kick the hornet's nest, because I've already got people mad at me because I'm challenging the definition of faith as mere persuasion. I don't think that's an appropriate definition of faith. Then I went on and I argued that I think that the whole, given what I've said about the definition of faith, I think the content of saving faith argument is not only wrong-headed, because saving faith doesn't have content at all. It has an object. This is my point. Saving faith doesn't have content. There's not a list of propositions. It has an object. If we accept all, it has an object. This is my point. Saving faith doesn't have content. There's not a list of propositions. It has an object. If we accept, Tim, the premise that saving faith has content, the natural question becomes, and you this earlier, is what are those list of propositions? Which ones make the list? Which ones don't make the list? And that becomes the 20-year argument that we have. And I am seeing here a very serious problem in the distinction between evangelism and discipleship. And one of the reasons that I reject lordship salvation is because I think that it seriously confuses evangelism and discipleship. Lordship salvation takes a discipleship issue, which is something like my submission to the lordship of Jesus Christ.